the Ripper. Ripper is the name given to an unidentified serial killer who terrorized the Whitechapel district of London in the 1880s. The Ripper's crimes were brutal and focused primarily on female sex workers, those of which who lived in impoverished and overcrowded slums of Easton London in the 1890s, year 1888. Between the months August to November, he had killed 5 women, and these killings were extremely violent. Jack the Ripper's signature killing method involved slashing the victims' throats and then performing gruesome abdominal mutilations, often removing organs such as the uterus or kidneys. This level of brutality led to widespread fear and hysteria in London, capturing the attention of both the public and the press. The media frenzy contributed to the killer's notoriety, as the press coined the name Jack the Ripper from a letter which was apparently sent by the murderer to the Central News Agency, though the authenticity of this letter remains disputed. The motivations behind the Ripper's crimes have been widely speculated upon but remain unknown, and theories range from the killer being driven by sexual sadism, deep-seated misogyny, or possibly even a desire for notoriety. Some speculate that the killer had advanced knowledge on human anatomy, as his mutilations were very precise, suggesting that he might have been a surgeon or a butcher. Despite a massive investigation by Scotland Yard involving hundreds of interviews and following numerous leads, Jack the Ripper was never caught. The lack of forensic technology and the chaotic nature of the investigation left many questions unanswered. Numerous suspects have been suggested over the years, but none have been definitively proven to be the Ripper. The case remains unsolved, making Jack the Ripper one of history's most infamous and elusive serial killers. The Zodiac Killer, like Jack the Ripper, is another elusive serial killer with their identity still not being known. To this day, they are known for a series of brutal murders that took place in Northern California during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The killer is officially linked to at least 5 murders, though we claimed to have killed 37 people, and taunting letters sent to newspapers. The Zodiac's crimes began in December 1968, with the murder of 2 teenagers near Vallejo, California. And over the next several years, he would strike again, targeting young couples in secluded areas. His methods included shooting and stabbing victims, sometimes even attacking in broad daylight. The cryptic letters and ciphers he would send to local newspapers led to him gaining notoriety. And in these letters, he would boast about his crimes and mocked law enforcement's inability to catch him. The letters were filled with symbols, threats, and codes, with one famously containing a 48-character cipher that the Zodiac claimed would reveal his identity, despite numerous attempts to crack his codes. The mystery surrounding him and his identity still continues on the Zodiac Killer's motivations remain unclear, but he appeared to be driven by a desire for attention, power, and control. His use of media to communicate with the public and law enforcement was highly unusual, and suggested that he enjoyed the fear and chaos he instigated. He displayed a calculated, almost theatrical cruelty that made him a figure of terror during his active years, despite a massive investigation and numerous suspects over the years. He was unfortunately never caught. His last confirmed communication was in 1974, and no new credible leads have emerged since. The Zodiac Killer remains a haunting figure in human history, with theories and investigations surrounding him and his crimes continuing to this day. Hikatilo, known as the Butcher of Rostov, was born on October 16, 1936 in the Ukrainian SSR. His early life was not easy, as he grew up during the famine in the Soviet Union, which led to tales of cannibalism. In his village, his father was captured during World War II, and Chikatilo himself faced bullying due to his shy nature and physical weakness. These early experiences likely influenced his later violent tendencies, and as he got older, he worked various jobs, eventually becoming a teacher. However, his inability to maintain discipline in the classroom and his inappropriate behavior towards students led to his dismissal. He later worked as a factory clerk. and despite his troubled behavior, he married and fathered 2 children, maintaining a facade that he was a normal citizen. His killing spree began in 1978 and lasted until 1990, as he targeted women and children, luring them to secluded areas where he would assault, mutilate, and murder them. His victims suffered horrific violence, including stabbing, dismal, and peril cannibalism in Chikatilo, derived sexual gratification from the act of killing, which he later attributed to him feeling like he had little power in other aspects of his life. Because of this, he claimed that his crimes were driven by anger and sexual frustration, despite being arrested. Multiple times during the investigation, Chikatilo evaded capture. Due to a lack of evidence and investigative errors, he was finally caught in November 1990, when undercover officers observed him approaching children at a train station. Forensic evidence, including blood and semen samples, linked him to several of the murders, and he eventually ended up confessing to killing 56 people, but was only convicted of 52 murders in 1992 in October. Later that year, he was sentenced to death, and on February 14, 1994, Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the head. The Toy Box Killer. Toy Box, who was born as David Parker Ray on November 6, 1939 in Belen, New Mexico, had a very troubled childhood. He was raised by his grandfather, who would give him extreme punishments, and he was often exposed to violent pornography by his father, which allegedly influenced his sadistic tendencies. Ray struggled with feelings of inadequacy and developed strange sexual fantasies from an early age. As an adult, Ray worked as a mechanic for the New Mexico Parts Department, gaining a reputation as a skilled handyman. Behind this ordinary facade, he constructed a soundproof trailer, which he called his toy box, equipped with a gynecological chair, surgical tools, whips, chains, and other tools for torture. Ray lured victims into his trailer, often with the help of accomplices, including his girlfriend Cindy Hindi. Once inside, the victims were drugged, restrained, and subjected to horrific torture and sexual assault, sometimes lasting for days on. Ray would also record his sessions, playing tapes of the victims that detailed the torment that they would later endure. His sadistic acts were driven by a desire for control and domination, and he meticulously planned his crimes to avoid detection. He is suspected of murdering multiple victims, though none of the bodies were ever found, making it difficult to determine the full extent of his crimes. He was eventually caught in 1999 when one of his victims, Cynthia Vigil, managed to escape from his trailer and alerted authorities. An investigation took place, uncovering the chilling contents of the trailer, and this led to Ray's arrest. He was convicted of numerous charges, including kidnapping and torture, and was sentenced to 224 years in prison. David Parker died of a heart attack in 2002, while still incarcerated, leaving behind a legacy of horror and unanswered questions about the true number of his, John Gacy, victims. John Wayne Gacy, often referred to as the Killer Clown, was responsible for the murders of at least 33 young men and boys. He was born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Illinois, and he had a pretty rough childhood. His alcoholic father was abusive, in which he would belittle and physically assault Gacy. Despite these challenges, he sought out acceptance and respectability, joining community organizations and becoming a successful businessman. Gacy was known for his involvement in local politics and his charitable work, often dressing as Pogo the Clown to entertain children at parties and events. This public persona marked his dark, predatory nature, as he would lure his victims, often young men from the Chicago area, by offering them jobs or promising them money. Once they were in his home, he would give them alcohol or drugs, then handcuff and assault them. Many of his victims were strangled or suffocated, and Gacy buried 26 of the bodies in the crawlspace beneath his home. His crimes went unnoticed for several years, due to how much of a respectable figure he was. However, in December 1978, Gass's last victim, 15-year-old Robert Past, went missing after being seen with Gacy. This led to a police investigation, and a search warrant was eventually issued at Gass's home. The horrifying discovery of human remains in the crawlspace led to his arrest, and during his trial in 1980, Gacy confessed to the murders but pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death, with him spending 14 years on death row, where he would paint pictures of clowns, and he was eventually executed by lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, BTK 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and he became infamously known as the BTK Killer, which stands for blind torture and kill. Later in his life, during his childhood, his family life was seemingly ordinary. However, he exhibited disturbing behavior from an early age, including a fascination with bondage and a tendency to kill small animals. These early signs of psychopathy were masked by his otherwise normal life. Rader held jobs as a compliance officer and security alarm installer, and he was also active in his church, even serving as its president. At one point, he also had a family appearing to live a typical suburban lifestyle. Eventually, he started killing people between the years 1974 to 1991, terrorizing Wichita, Kansas, by committing heinous crimes involving binding, torturing, and murdering his victims. Rader's reign of terror lasted over 17 years, during which he had killed 10 people, including men, women, and children. His crimes were especially horrifying due to their premeditated nature and the cruelty with which he carried them out. His motivations stemmed from his sadistic fantasies and need for power and control. He craved attention and would taunt law enforcement with letters and cryptic messages that detailed his crimes. He loved the fear that he instilled in the community, and also how he was able to stay anonymous for such a long time. Feeding his ego, Rader was finally apprehended in 2005 when he resumed sending taunting letters to the police. He made the mistake of sending a floppy disk, which authorities were able to trace back to his church computer. He was arrested, confessed to his crimes, and in 2005 was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. Rader's case is one of the most notorious in American criminal history, showcasing the terrifying potential of a killer hiding in plain sight. Harold Shipman. Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, was a British general practitioner who is believed to be one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Born on January 14, 1946 in Nottingham, England. Shipman had a seemingly normal upbringing, though his mother's death from cancer when he was 17 profoundly affected him during her illness. He observed how morphine eased her suffering, which may have influenced his later behavior as he became an adult. He became a well-respected doctor practicing in Highgate, Manchester. However, between 1975 to 1998, he secretly murdered about 250 patients, predominantly elderly women, by administering lethal doses of heroin. Shipman exploited the trust his patients had in him, even visiting them at home under the guise of providing care, then injecting them with the fatal drug as a doctor. He was seen as a caretaker, making his murders even more insidious. His victims who trusted him to safeguard their life were instead killed in cold blood, and he would also falsify medical records to cover up his actions, and even altered wills to benefit himself. In some cases, his motivations remain largely unclear, but some experts speculate that his mother's death and his perceived control over life, and death may have played a role in his killings. Others believe he was driven by a god complex seeking power over his victims' fates. He was eventually caught in 1998 after he forged the will of one of his victims, Kathleen Grundy, leading her daughter to suspect something was up. An investigation followed uncovering the large amount of murders he had committed, and in the year 2000 he was convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. He hanged himself in his prison cell in 2004, escaping justice for the full extent of his monstrous Bundy crimes. Ted Bundy, born on November 24, 1946, was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. He had a troubled childhood, growing up under the belief that his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. He later discovered the truth, which may have contributed to his growing sense of anger and confusion. Despite his disturbed inner life, Bundy became a seemingly successful young man attending college and law school and working on political campaigns. He used this facade of normalcy to build trust with his victims, often faking injuries or pretending to be a figure of authority to get closer to them. He would also use his good looks and intelligence to lure women to their deaths. And between the years 1974 to 1978, it is believed that he had murdered at least 30 young women, though the true number may be even higher. His crimes spanned across several states, including Washington, Utah, Colorado, and in Florida, involving abduction, sexual assaults, and even necrophilia. His motivations were deeply rooted in a desire for control and power over his victims. Driven by sadistic sexual fantasies, his murders were not just about killing. They involved horrific violence, and he would often return to the bodies of his victims to further desecrate them. Bundy's capture came after several close encounters with law enforcement, and in the year 1975, he was arrested in Utah for a traffic violation with the police, linking him to a series of missing women after escaping custody. Twice, Bundy was finally apprehended in Florida in 1978, and he was convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to death. Bundy was executed in the electric chair in Florida on January 24, 1989, and his case remains infamous due to his ability to manipulate those around him, hiding his monstrous nature behind a facade of charm and normality. Terminator. The Terminator was a Ukrainian serial killer who murdered 52 people between 1989 and 1996, born on July 25, 1959 in the village of Lasky, Ukraine, and now had a troubling upbringing. His mother died when he was young, and he was sent to an orphanage after his father remarried. This rejection and of family bonds likely contributed to his psychological instability and violent tendencies. Anau began his criminal career with petty theft, but soon escalated to mass killings. His method involved targeting isolated households in rural areas, and he would break into homes, kill everyone inside, and set the houses on fire to destroy evidence. His victims included entire families, often spanning multiple generations, and he used guns, blunt objects, and knives with equal brutality. His spree instilled fear across Ukraine, earning him his chilling nickname. His motives appear to be a blend of greed, thrill, and psychological compulsion. Anau later claimed that voices instructed him to kill, and that he derived satisfaction from the act. He showed absolutely no remorse. Instead, blaming society and his difficult upbringing for his actions, Anau was captured in 1996 after a massive manhunt, and authorities linked him to the murders through evidence found in his possession, including stolen items from victims' homes during his trial. He confessed to the killings and was sentenced to death in 1999. Though this was changed, the life imprisonment when Ukraine abolished the death penalty in the year 2000. Anau died of heart failure on August 27, 2013. Iceman Killer linked to the deaths of up to 200 people born on April 11, 1935, in Jersey City, New Jersey. He endured an abusive childhood at the hands of his father Stanley in neglect from his mother Anna. This environment of violence and dysfunction reportedly shaped his lack of empathy and cruel tendencies. Klinsky started committing crimes in his teens, including robbery assault by the 1960s. he became associated with organized crime families in both New York and New Jersey, and his large stature, efficiency, and willingness to kill made him a sought-after hitman for the Gambino crime family, and others he earned the name the Iceman, due to his method of freezing victims' bodies to confuse time of death. Estimates by authorities, Klein's methods were brutal and varied, including shootings, stabbings, poisonings, and strangulations. He showed no remorse and claimed he killed people who annoyed him or posed the threats. Despite his due life as a loving family man, his wife and children were reportedly unaware of his criminal activities for years. His downfall came in 1986 when an undercover agent infiltrated his circle, arrested and convicted in 1988 for multiple killings. Kinski received 2 consecutive life terms while in prison. He gave interviews revealing horrifying details about his crimes, claiming to have killed over 100 people. Though some of these claims remain unverified, Kinski died on March 5, 2006 in prison under suspicious circumstances, possibly due to foul play. His life and crimes have been the subject of books, documentaries, and films portraying him as a complex, calculating killer shaped by a violent upbringing and a remorseless worldview. Lucas Henry Lee. Lucas was an American serial killer who gained infamy for his claims of having murdered hundreds, though many of these confessions were later proven false or are unconfirmed. Born on August 23, 1936 in Blacksburg, Virginia. Lucas had an abusive and traumatic childhood. His mother, Viola, was a violent alcoholic who forced him to cross-dress and beat him regularly. His father, a disabled alcoholic, provided little support. This unstable upbringing led to emotional instability and a life of crime. Lucas committed his first killing in 1960 with his mother being the victim. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison but released in 1970. And over the next decade he traveled across the United States committing petty crimes and allegedly several murders. In the late 1970s, he partnered with Otis Tull, another alleged serial killer, and they claim to have embarked on a cross-country killing spree in 1983. Lucas was arrested for unlawful possession of a firearm, and while in custody he began confessing to numerous murders involving himself in tool and crimes across 26 states. His confessions made him infamous, with some attributing up to 600 murders to him. However, investigation soon discovered inconsistencies in his accounts, such as conflicting timelines and unverifiable details. It became clear that Lucas exaggerated or fabricated many confessions, likely seeking attention or favorable present and treatment. Despite the controversy, Lucas was convicted of 11 murders, including the killing of a girl known as Orange Socks, for which he received a death sentence, but this later turned into life imprisonment by Texas Governor George W. Bush. Due to lack of evidence, Lucas died in prison on March 12, 2001, and his legacy remains one of deception, raising questions about law enforcement's reliance on confessions and the psychology of pathological liars. Iqbal Pakistani serial killer, who confessed to the murders of 100 young boys in Lahore, Pakistan during 1998 to 1999, born in the year 1956, and into a wealthy family in Lahore. Little is widely documented about Iqbal's childhood, or what may have led to his crimes. He operated a steel recasting business and ran a gym which he allegedly used to lure victims. His victims were primarily runaway boys and children from poor families ranging in age from 6 to 16. Iqbal's method involved abducting the boys, sexually assaulting them, and then strangling them. He would dissolve their bodies in acid baths to dispose of the evidence, and he kept detailed records of his crimes, including photographs and shoes of his victims. Iqbal's crimes were discovered when he sent a letter to police and local media in December 1999, confessing to the killing. He provided evidence of his crimes, including photographs, clothes, and the shoes of his victims. His trial was highly publicized in Pakistan, and in March 2000 he was sentenced to death in an unprecedented manner, as he was to be strangled in front of the parents of his victims, dismembered into 100 pieces, dissolved in acid mirroring what he had done to his victims. This sentence was believed to be the first of its kind in modern history. However, Eyeball never faced this punishment.